What it was like to attend school in the 1960s, 10 scandalous and shocking facts. The 1960s were a transformative decade, marked by social upheaval, the civil rights movement, and technological advancements. Schools of the time reflected the era's turbulence, offering a mix of progressive ideals and outdated norms. For students, education in the 1960s was a journey through segregation, corporal punishment, and emerging countercultural influences. Let's dive into 10 scandalous and shocking truths about what it was like to attend school during this tumultuous decade. Fact number 1. Segregation was still legal in southern states. Despite the Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education ruling in 1954, which declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional, southern states resisted integration for years, using legal loopholes, intimidation, and outright defiance. One of the most infamous moments occurred on June 11, 1963, at the University of Alabama. Governor George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door to block the admission of 2 black students, Vivian Malone and James Hood. Federalized National Guard troops were required to enforce their entry, an act symbolizing federal authority clashing with state resistance. Public high schools in states like Mississippi, Georgia, and South Carolina also resisted integration. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act aimed to address these disparities, but in Mississippi, 99% of black students still attended segregated schools, many of which lacked basic resources like libraries, modern textbooks, or sports facilities. The disparity between separate but equal schools was stark. Black schools often operated with less than half the funding of their white counterparts. Federal reports and civil rights activists like Medgar Evers tirelessly documented these inequities, but meaningful progress in desegregation wasn't achieved until the late 1960s and early 1970s, following prolonged legal battles and grassroots protests. Number 2. Corporal punishment was rampant and legal. Corporal punishment in schools was an accepted disciplinary method in the 1960s, deeply rooted in American culture and law. Teachers and administrators wielded paddles, belts, and rulers to discipline students for infractions ranging from talking back to minor infractions like chewing gum. A 1967 Time magazine survey revealed that nearly 70% of parents approved of physical punishment, reflecting societal norms that equated strict discipline with moral upbringing. Instances of abuse, however, often crossed ethical and legal boundaries. In one infamous case in Kentucky, a teacher struck a student 18 times for a trivial offense, leaving the child with visible injuries. In another shocking incident in 1969, a teacher in California used a wooden paddle so forcefully that it broke a student's hand, leading to criminal charges. Some schools implemented paddling policies with specific guidelines to avoid excessive force, but enforcement was inconsistent. Critics began raising concerns, arguing that corporal punishment instilled fear rather than respect and normalized violence as a response to conflict, laying the groundwork for future bans. Question for you: do you think corporal punishment kept students disciplined, or was it a step too far? Share your thoughts below. Number 3. Fear of nuclear war dictated the curriculum. The Cold War infiltrated every aspect of education, including mandatory duck and cover drills to prepare students for nuclear attacks. Schools distributed pamphlets with titles like How to Survive the Bomb and Built Fallout Shelters on campuses. A New York Times article in 1962 described how students at PS 102 practiced hiding under desks weekly, accompanied by sirens blaring overhead. Critics called it a generation of fear, while some educators argued it distracted from academics. Number 4. Dress codes stifled individuality. Strict dress codes were the norm, particularly for girls. Many schools banned trousers for female students, requiring skirts to be knee-length or longer. In 1968, an Oklahoma high school made national headlines for expelling a girl who wore culottes, sparking a nationwide debate about gender equality. Boys faced restrictions as well. Long hair, inspired by the Beatles, was often banned. A student's appearance reflects their discipline, declared Principal Robert Greene of Austin, Texas, in 1965. Number 5. Drug culture creeped into schools. The counterculture movement of the late 1960s brought marijuana, LSD, and other drugs into American high schools. By 1969, the U.S. Department of Health reported that 12% of high school students admitted to using drugs, up from just 2% earlier in the decade. At one San Francisco high school, rumors of a teacher hosting drug parties reached local police, leading to arrests and public outcry. The Los Angeles Times ran a scathing editorial in 1968, calling it a pandemic of corruption. Number 6. Sex education was taboo and controversial. Sex education in the 1960s was a battleground for cultural and moral debates. Programs were virtually non-existent in most states, and attempts to introduce them often met with fierce resistance. In California, a groundbreaking statewide curriculum was introduced in 1968, sparking immediate backlash. Protests erupted across the state, with parents claiming the lessons undermined family values. A PTA president in Orange County declared, "This is a communist plot to destroy our morals." Despite a teenage pregnancy rate that had been steadily rising since the 1950s, a 1969 Gallup poll revealed that 48% of Americans opposed sex education in schools. Most students relied on informal sources, such as peers or outdated biology textbooks, leading to widespread misinformation. The controversy underscored a broader cultural clash between traditionalist and progressive views on education, setting the stage for decades of debate over comprehensive sex education. Number 7. The Vietnam War divided classrooms. The Vietnam War deeply divided American society, and classrooms became arenas of ideological conflict. By the late 1960s, high school students organized sit-ins, walkouts, and protests against the war. In Chicago, history teacher Charles Finn became a controversial figure after he openly criticized U.S. involvement in Vietnam during a 1967 lesson. His dismissal sparked student-led protests demanding academic freedom. Conversely, many schools mandated patriotic assemblies, such as fundraisers for soldiers and performances of nationalistic songs. Teachers faced pressure to align with community sentiments, often leading to self-censorship. In some schools, students clashed over the war, mirroring the generational and ideological divides that permeated American society. The Vietnam War not only disrupted classrooms but also reshaped civic education, as students and teachers grappled with complex questions about morality, patriotism, and dissent. Question for you: if you were in a 1960s classroom, how would you have responded to the Vietnam War? Protest or stay neutral? Let us know in the comments. Number 8. Teachers had minimal qualifications. Teacher shortages in the 1960s exposed significant flaws in hiring practices. In rural areas, individuals without degrees or proper training were often employed as educators. In 1963, a Florida school district scandalized the nation when it was revealed that a high school dropout had been teaching elementary students for over a year. A subsequent investigation uncovered that she was illiterate. A Life magazine expose in 1965 revealed that many states set the bar low for teaching qualifications due to low salaries. The average teacher earned under $5,000 annually, equivalent to about $45,000 today, discouraging highly educated candidates from entering the profession. This disparity led to widespread disparities in educational quality, particularly in underfunded regions, where students often received substandard instruction. Number 9. School shootings were rare but horrifying. Though rare, school shootings in the 1960s left lasting scars. The most infamous incident occurred on August 1, 1966, when former Marine Charles Whitman climbed the University of Texas Tower and opened fire, killing 14 people and injuring 31. The attack shocked the nation, leading to renewed conversations about mental health, gun control, and campus safety. In response, some high schools implemented security measures like metal detectors and increased patrols, though critics argued these were insufficient. The Whitman tragedy underscored the vulnerability of educational institutions and the need for systemic change, sparking debates that continue to this day. Number 10. Technology was barely emerging. Technology in the classroom was in its infancy during the 1960s. Overhead projectors, film reels, and typewriters were standard tools, while computers were a novelty reserved for advanced programs. In 1967, only 1% of U.S. high schools had access to computers, which were often massive, room-sized machines capable of performing basic calculations. A Washington Post article from 1969 highlighted a New York school that proudly showcased its single computer, which took hours to complete simple tasks. These early machines hinted at the technological revolution to come, but for most students in the 1960s, the concept of digital learning was inconceivable. The decade planted the seeds for the tech-driven classrooms of the future, even as most educators struggled with the limitations of the era's tools.